"Mom, please stop doing that with your hands at the table." Daniel Mercer's voice cut through the soft jazz floating across L'Oran restaurant. Not loud enough to cause a scene, but cold enough to make the silverware feel heavier. Across from him, Evelyn Mercer slowly lowered her trembling hands into her lap. The elderly woman stared down at the untouched sea base in front of her, while crystal chandeliers reflected softly against the wine glasses between them. Around the restaurant, conversations continued in polished Manhattan whispers. Expensive watches glimmered. Champagne glasses clinked. Nobody noticed the silence settling at table 14, except Claire Whitmore. From behind the bar, Claire paused while drying a glass with a white cloth. Warm amber light brushed against her pale skin and ash-blonde hair tied into a loose knot behind her neck. She watched the older woman carefully, watched the small tension in her shoulders, the hesitation in her fingers, the quiet humiliation people often missed because they weren't looking closely enough. Mr. Mercer requested another bottle of Bordeaux. Another server muttered while rushing past her. Claire nodded automatically, but her eyes stayed on Evelyn. Daniel had already returned to his phone, his jaw tense, navy suit flawless, silver watch gleaming beneath the chandelier light. Every few seconds, another executive seated beside him leaned closer to discuss numbers, contracts, percentages. Millions of dollars moving across the table while his mother sat invisible only 3 feet away. Evelyn carefully lifted her hand again, attempting another sign toward a passing waiter. The young man smiled awkwardly. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. "Did you need butter?" Evelyn's expression fell. She shook her head gently, then pointed toward her plate, toward the garnish beside the fish. "Almonds." Claire's eyes sharpened instantly. She set the glass down, because she recognized that look immediately, not confusion. Fear. The kitchen door swung open behind her as another server grabbed the plate destined for table 14. Claire stepped forward fast enough to stop him before he crossed the dining room. "Wait." The young waiter blinked. "What?" Claire lowered her voice. "That sauce has almond butter in it. So she's trying to warn you she's allergic." The waiter frowned. "How do you know that?" Claire didn't answer. She simply took the plate herself and walked across the polished marble floor while rain tapped softly against the tall Manhattan windows beside the restaurant. Daniel barely looked up when she approached. "We didn't order." Then Claire turned toward Evelyn and signed softly. "Perfectly. Please don't eat this. It contains almonds." Evelyn froze. Her pale blue eyes widened instantly beneath the warm dining room light. For a second, the entire table went still. Daniel slowly lifted his head from his phone. One executive stopped mid-sentence. Another lowered his wine glass halfway to the table. And Claire continued signing with calm, graceful precision. "I can bring you another dish if you'd like." Evelyn's lips parted soundlessly. Her eyes glistened almost immediately, because for the first time that entire evening, someone had spoken directly to her instead of around her. Nobody at table 14 spoke for several long seconds. Even the jazz piano near the bar seemed quieter somehow, softer beneath the steady rain pressing against the windows outside. Evelyn Mercer stared at Claire with trembling eyes while her fingers slowly moved again. "You know sign language?" Claire gave a small nod. "Yes, ma'am." Her hands moved naturally, effortlessly, like breathing, like something practiced so many times it no longer required thought. Evelyn's expression cracked into something fragile and emotional at the same time. Relief. Daniel watched the exchange carefully now, his phone forgotten beside the wine glass near his hand. Up close, Claire looked older than he first assumed. Early 40s maybe. There were faint lines near her eyes that did not come from age alone. They came from exhaustion, from years of carrying too much quietly. Yet her posture remained calm, controlled. "You should have informed the kitchen about the allergy," Daniel said finally, his tone cool again, though less sharp than before. Claire looked at him directly for the first time. That evening, she tried. The words landed gently, but hard enough to make one of the executives lower his eyes toward the table. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. His jaw tightened. He was not used to being corrected in public, especially not by a waitress. Claire turned back toward Evelyn before the silence became heavier. "Would you prefer the herb roasted chicken instead?" she sighed. Evelyn smiled immediately. "Yes, thank you." Claire nodded once. "I will personally speak with the chef." She lifted the dangerous plate from the table and disappeared toward the kitchen, while conversations slowly resumed around the dining room. But not completely. Daniel noticed people glancing toward his table now. Curious. Interested. One of his business partners adjusted his cufflinks awkwardly before muttering, "Well, that was impressive." Daniel said nothing. Across from him, Evelyn continued staring toward the kitchen entrance with watery eyes. Then her fingers moved again. Slower this time. She looked at me when she spoke. Daniel blinked. "What?" Evelyn repeated the signs carefully. "Most people talk to the person beside me instead of me." Her smile faded slightly. "Even family." A strange discomfort crawled into Daniel's chest. He loosened his tie half an inch. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for him to feel it. Because she was right. He had spent years hiring assistants, caretakers, drivers, private nurses, people to help his mother communicate faster, easier, cleaner. He told himself it was efficiency, compassion through convenience. But sitting there beneath the warm chandelier light, he suddenly realized something uncomfortable. He could not remember the last full conversation he had signed directly to her himself. The kitchen doors opened again. Claire returned carrying a fresh plate. Steam curled gently into the air beneath the golden lighting as she carefully placed the meal before Evelyn. "No nuts. I checked everything personally." Evelyn's lips trembled into a grateful smile. "You are very kind." Claire hesitated for the first time, just briefly. Then she signed back. "My younger brother was deaf." Something flickered across her face after the sentence. Fast, but painful enough to leave a shadow behind her eyes. Daniel noticed it immediately, and for reasons he could not explain, he suddenly wanted to know the rest of that story. Daniel Mercer had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking once. He had dismantled companies twice their size and walked away calm enough to order dessert afterward. But somehow, the quiet waitress standing beside his mother unsettled him more than any boardroom ever had. Claire stepped away from table 14 after refilling Evelyn's tea. Her black uniform moved softly beneath the golden restaurant lights while conversations slowly rebuilt around the dining room. Yet Daniel kept watching her. The way she listened before people finished speaking. The way she noticed details nobody else seemed to catch. One of the executives beside him chuckled lightly while cutting into his steak. "You should hire her, Daniel. Clearly she is overqualified for this place." Another man smirked. "At the very least, your mother likes her more than any assistant you have brought around in years." Daniel forced a faint smile, but Evelyn signed something immediately across the table. Sharp. Fast. Claire glanced over from across the room and almost smiled before hiding it professionally. "What did she say?" one executive asked curiously. Daniel sighed quietly. "She said maybe that is because Claire actually listens." An awkward silence followed. Not hostile, just uncomfortable enough to tighten the air. Daniel picked up his wine glass slowly. The deep red reflection shimmered against the crystal while rain continued streaking down the windows outside. He remembered being 12 years old, sitting beside his mother after she lost most of her hearing. Back then, he learned sign language obsessively. Flashcards, night classes, practice sessions until midnight. He wanted to protect her from feeling alone. Then life happened. Boarding school, college, startups, investors, meetings, flights. Somewhere along the way, speaking with his hands became slower than speaking with money. Easier to let assistants translate. Easier to let silence grow. Across the dining room, Claire paused near the kitchen entrance while helping another older customer button a wool coat. Her movements were patient, unhurried. Daniel noticed something else then. She never acted performative. No exaggerated kindness. No desperate politeness hoping for a larger tip. Everything about her felt genuine and strangely distant at the same time. Like someone who had learned long ago not to expect too much from people. "Mr. Mercer?" Daniel blinked. One of his executives slid a contract folder toward him. "We need your approval before midnight." Daniel stared at the pages without reading them. His attention drifted again toward Claire, just as another waiter approached her carrying a tray of champagne flutes. The younger server leaned closer and whispered something that made him laugh. Claire smiled politely, but only for a second. Then her eyes instinctively returned to Evelyn, checking on her again, making sure she was comfortable. Daniel noticed his mother smiling now too. Really smiling. Not the small polite expression she usually wore during public dinners. Her shoulders looked lighter somehow beneath the cream cashmere sweater. Younger almost. And for reasons he could not fully explain, Guilt settled heavily into Daniel's chest. Because one exhausted waitress had managed in 20 minutes to give his mother something he had not given her in years. Attention. Real attention. Claire finally approached the table again carrying a small dessert plate with warm apple tart and cinnamon cream. Evelyn touched her wrist gently before she could leave. "Will you sit with me for 1 minute?" Claire hesitated. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Daniel. He should have said no immediately. Staff sitting with guests violated every standard this restaurant probably had. But instead, Daniel slowly closed the contract folder and said quietly, "Please, stay." Claire stood beside the table for a moment without moving. The warm lights above reflected softly against the polished silverware while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the Manhattan skyline. Around them, expensive conversations continued in low, elegant murmurs, but Table 14 had become its own. "Quiet world. You do not have to if you are busy." Evelyn signed gently, though the hope in her eyes said otherwise. Claire glanced toward the kitchen instinctively. Through the swinging doors, cooks moved beneath harsh white fluorescent lights while servers rushed between steaming plates and ringing orders. Her shift was not over. There were still tables waiting. Refills. Checks. Endless motion. Yet something in Evelyn's expression made it impossible to walk away immediately. Claire slowly lowered herself into the empty chair beside her for what was supposed to be only a minute. Daniel watched carefully across the table. Up close now, he noticed details he had missed before. The faint scar near Claire's wrist. The tiredness hidden beneath the makeup she barely wore. The way her hands rested calmly despite the pressure of being seated among people wealthier than most of Manhattan combined. She did not look intimidated. She looked accustomed to surviving uncomfortable rooms. Evelyn signed something quickly with a soft smile. Claire laughed under her breath before translating aloud. "She says your tie has looked too tight all evening." One of the executives chuckled awkwardly. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Almost a laugh, almost not. "She has been criticizing my tie since 1989, he replied dryly. Evelyn's eyes sparkled immediately. Claire signed back to her with natural rhythm, and suddenly the older woman looked alive in a way Daniel had not seen in years. Her hands moved faster now, her posture straighter, her face expressive beneath the chandelier glow. Daniel realized with quiet shame that he had forgotten how animated his mother became when someone actually communicated in her language instead of forcing her into everyone else's. "How long have you known sign language?" he asked suddenly. Claire's eyes shifted toward him. Calm, guarded. "Since I was 6. Your brother taught you?" For the first time all evening, a shadow crossed her expression deeply enough to linger. She looked down briefly at Evelyn's teacup before answering. "No, I learned for him." Silence settled again. Softer this time. Not awkward, heavy. One executive discreetly checked his watch before quietly excusing himself to take a phone call. Another followed moments later. The business dinner was dissolving without anyone formally ending it. Yet Daniel barely noticed. Claire signed another joke toward Evelyn, and the older woman suddenly laughed soundlessly, shoulders shaking beneath her cream sweater. Heads turned from nearby tables. Not because the moment was loud, but because joy like that was rare. Genuine. Daniel stared at his mother in disbelief. "I have not seen her laugh like that in a long time," he admitted quietly. Claire looked toward Evelyn before answering. "People stop laughing when they spend too much time feeling unseen." The sentence hit harder than Daniel expected. Because he knew immediately, she was not only talking about his mother. Claire rose gently from the chair as another server approached looking stressed. "Table 6 needs help with a wine spill," the young waiter whispered urgently. Claire nodded and stood. Professional again. Composed again. But before leaving, Evelyn reached for her hand one more time and signed slowly enough for Daniel to understand every word himself. "Thank you for making me feel human tonight." Claire froze completely for half a second. Then she squeezed Evelyn's hand softly, and Daniel noticed her eyes glistening for the very first time. Claire quickly turned away before anyone at the table could notice the emotion rising in her eyes. The polished heels of passing servers clicked sharply across the marble floor while she disappeared toward table 6, carrying fresh napkins and a calm expression she no longer fully felt. Behind her, Daniel remained seated in silence. His business partners had gradually drifted away toward phone calls and waiting town cars outside, leaving the massive dining table strangely empty now. Only Evelyn stayed relaxed beneath the warm chandelier light, slowly eating apple tart while watching her son carefully. Daniel loosened his tie another inch. He hated emotional situations. Hated not knowing the correct response. Numbers made sense. Contracts made sense. Human feelings were unpredictable, messy. Yet tonight, every polished wall he normally hid behind felt thinner somehow. Evelyn tapped lightly against the table to regain his attention before signing slowly. You used to talk to me like that. Daniel swallowed quietly. I know. The answer came almost too fast. Evelyn's gentle smile faded just slightly. Then why did you stop? Daniel looked down at his untouched wine glass. Deep red reflections trembled softly beneath the candlelight. Outside, rain continued falling against the windows in silver streaks. Because life became busy, he answered finally. Even to his own ears, the excuse sounded weak. Evelyn signed again. Slower this time. Sadder. No. You stopped because people made you feel embarrassed. Daniel's eyes lifted immediately. That is not true. But the moment the words left his mouth, he knew they were not completely honest. In college, people stared when his mother signed too expressively at restaurants. Investors sometimes became impatient during meetings when interpreters needed clarification. More than once, assistants had gently suggested using written notes instead because it looked more professional. Slowly, almost invisibly, Daniel adapted. He shortened conversations, avoided public signing, chose convenience over connection. And somewhere along the way, his mother became quieter. Across the restaurant, Claire balanced a heavy tray while helping another elderly couple near the windows. The husband struggled slightly with his coat, and Claire patiently adjusted the collar for him while listening to his wife talk about their train ride from Connecticut. Daniel noticed something important then. Claire treated every person the same way. The wealthy couple ordering $200 wine, the nervous busboy carrying dirty plates, the dishwasher rushing through the kitchen doors, even Evelyn. No performance, no calculation, just attention, real attention. A younger server suddenly approached Daniel's table carrying the final check presenter with nervous hands. Mr. Mercer, whenever you are ready. Daniel accepted it automatically. The total barely registered in his mind. He signed a number without looking and slid the black folder closed again. The waiter opened it moments later and nearly froze. Daniel had left a $10,000 tip. Evelyn noticed immediately and signed something sharp enough to make him exhale quietly. Money is easier for you than words. Daniel rubbed a tired hand across his jaw. Probably. Evelyn looked toward Claire again. That woman did not help me because of money. Daniel followed her gaze across the restaurant. Claire was laughing softly now at something the elderly customer had signed incorrectly with clumsy hands after she taught him a simple gesture for thank you. The moment lasted only seconds, but it looked genuine enough to ache. Then Claire glanced up unexpectedly and caught Daniel staring at her across the dining room. Neither looked away immediately, and for the first time in years, Daniel Mercer felt something unfamiliar settle uncomfortably inside his chest. Not attraction, not admiration, something quieter. The painful realization that a stranger had just shown him exactly how badly he had failed someone he loved. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle by the time L'Oran restaurant began emptying for the night. Candle flames flickered lower across the dining room, while exhausted servers reset tables beneath dim golden lighting. Somewhere near the kitchen, dishes clattered faintly against steel sinks. Claire moved through the quiet restaurant with practiced rhythm, stacking menus against her arm, while the last few customers drifted toward the exit in heavy coats and polished shoes. She could still feel Daniel Mercer's eyes on her from earlier. Not arrogant anymore. Not dismissive. Something else. Something heavier. She tried not to think about it. Claire. The voice stopped her near the coat station. She turned slowly. Daniel stood a few feet away now without the executives surrounding him. Without the loud business energy. Just a tall man in a navy suit holding his mother's wool coat carefully over one arm. Up close, the exhaustion in his face looked more human than intimidating. My mother wants to thank you again before we leave, he said quietly. Claire nodded once and followed him toward the front entrance where Evelyn waited near the marble lobby beneath a chandelier dimmed. For closing hour, the older woman's silver hair caught the warm light beautifully as she smiled the moment Claire approached. You made tonight feel normal again, Evelyn signed slowly. Claire's expression softened immediately. You should never have to feel invisible to make other people comfortable, she signed back. Daniel watched their hands carefully. Years ago, He could understand sign language almost as naturally as spoken words. Now he found himself struggling to follow certain gestures, missing details, missing emotions. The realization embarrassed him more than he expected. Evelyn touched Claire's hand gently before signing one more sentence. Your brother must have loved you very much. For the first time all evening, Claire looked completely unprepared for a question. Silence lingered between them beneath the low amber lights. Even Daniel noticed the slight change in her breathing. He did, she answered finally. His name was Noah. Evelyn waited patiently. Claire swallowed once before continuing. He lost his hearing after a high fever when he was 4 years old. My parents worked all the time, so I learned sign language with him. A faint smile appeared briefly, sad but warm. We used to practice for hours at the kitchen table, using old flashcards and children's books. Daniel listened quietly while distant thunder rolled beyond the glass entrance doors. What happened to him? He asked before thinking whether he should. Claire's eyes dropped toward the polished floor. Cancer. The single word changed the air instantly. Not dramatic, not loud, just heavy enough to silence the entire lobby. Daniel felt his chest tighten unexpectedly. Claire continued before sympathy could interrupt her. He was 16. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers curled tighter around the menus she still carried against her side. Toward the end, he stopped speaking completely. Sign language became the only way he communicated. Evelyn's eyes filled immediately. Daniel looked away briefly toward the rain outside because suddenly the elegant restaurant felt too small for the guilt building quietly inside him. Claire forced a small smile that did not fully reach her tired eyes. After he passed away, I kept signing anyway. I guess some habits become part of who you are. Evelyn squeezed her hand again. Daniel stared at Claire differently now. Not as a waitress, not as a stranger who embarrassed him during dinner, but as someone who carried grief with remarkable grace. Someone who had turned pain into kindness instead of bitterness. And somehow, that felt far rarer than anything money had ever bought him. For several seconds, nobody moved near the entrance of Waitress restaurant. The rain whispered softly against the glass outside, while muted reflections from passing taxis drifted across the marble floor. Claire stood quietly beneath the chandelier light, holding a stack of menus against her chest, and Daniel realized something uncomfortable again. She never used her pain to ask for sympathy. She simply carried it, calmly, the way some people carried winter coats through storms they knew would not end soon. Evelyn slowly reached for Claire's hand once more and signed carefully. Noah would be proud of you. Claire's lips parted slightly before she looked away toward the dark street outside. I hope so, she answered softly. A young valet pushed through the front doors carrying umbrellas against the drizzle outside. Cold air slipped briefly into the warm lobby before the doors closed again. Daniel cleared his throat quietly. You learned all of that for your brother? Claire nodded. At first because he was scared. Her fingers tightened slightly around the menus. After he lost his hearing, people treated him differently almost overnight. Teachers spoke slower to him like he suddenly became less intelligent. Friends stopped inviting him places because communication felt inconvenient. Daniel lowered his eyes. Every sentence seemed to hit somewhere deeper now. Claire continued carefully. The worst part was never the silence. She looked toward Evelyn gently. It was watching people stop trying. The words settled heavily between them. Evelyn blinked quickly to hide fresh tears. Daniel could not hide his reaction as easily. He loosened his jaw slightly and stared toward the rain outside because suddenly memories kept returning whether he wanted them or not. His mother sitting alone at charity events while people smiled politely without including her in conversations. Assistants summarizing discussions instead of letting her participate naturally. Himself checking emails while she signed stories he no longer fully followed. I thought I was helping, Daniel admitted quietly. Claire looked at him for a long moment before answering. Maybe you were trying to make life easier. Her voice remained gentle. But easy and connected are not always the same thing. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose. Somewhere behind them, restaurant staff dimmed another row of lights as closing time approached. Shadows deepened across the empty dining room now. Softer, more intimate. Evelyn suddenly signed something directly toward her son. Faster this time. Emotional enough that Daniel struggled to process every word immediately. Then he understood. His expression changed completely. What did she say? Claire asked carefully. Daniel swallowed once before answering aloud. She said tonight was the first dinner in years where she did not feel lonely sitting beside me. Silence. Heavy, painful silence. Daniel looked down at his mother, and for the first time all evening, he truly saw how old she had become. Not weak, not fragile, just tired of disappearing quietly in rooms full of people. Evelyn touched his sleeve gently, immediately regretting the sadness in his face. But Daniel suddenly lifted his hands awkwardly. Rusty, slower than before, yet deliberate. He signed directly to her himself for the first time in years. I am sorry. Evelyn froze instantly. Claire did too. Daniel's movements were imperfect now, some gestures clumsy from disuse. But he kept going anyway beneath the warm, fading light of the nearly empty restaurant. I should have listened more. Evelyn's eyes filled immediately. Then slowly, beautifully, she smiled. Not because the signing was perfect, but because after all these years, her son was finally trying again. The lobby remained completely still after Daniel signed those words. I am sorry. Imperfect gestures beneath dim golden light, but real. Evelyn's hands trembled as she lifted them toward his face. Her fingertips brushed his cheek gently, and Daniel suddenly looked younger somehow. Not like the ruthless executive from magazine covers or financial interviews. Just a tired son standing in front of his mother after years of emotional distance he could no longer pretend not to see. Claire quietly lowered her eyes, giving them space without walking away completely. Outside, rainwater shimmered along the Manhattan sidewalks while headlights stretched across the wet pavement like blurred ribbons of gold and white. Somewhere behind the reception desk, soft jazz still played through hidden speakers. Daniel tried signing again. Slower this time. I forgot too much. Evelyn immediately shook her head. Her response came fast enough that he almost missed part of it. Claire translated softly. She says people forget languages when nobody speaks to them anymore. Daniel swallowed hard, because that was exactly what had happened. He had not lost sign language all at once. He lost it meeting by meeting, flight by flight, year by year, every ignored dinner, every shortened conversation, every moment he chose convenience over connection. Claire finally stepped back slightly, preparing to return to work now that the emotional weight between mother and son no longer needed her standing in the middle of it. But before she could move away completely, Daniel spoke again. Claire. She turned calmly. Yes. Daniel hesitated. Strange for a man who usually answered billion-dollar questions in seconds. Would you? He stopped himself briefly and started again. Would you be willing to help me practice sign language again? Claire blinked once in visible surprise. Evelyn's eyes immediately brightened with hope. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I know that probably sounds ridiculous. No. Claire interrupted softly. It sounds important. Their eyes met quietly beneath the fading chandelier light. For the first time all evening, Daniel noticed how exhausted she looked now that the adrenaline of the dinner had faded. Her shoulders slightly tense. Her feet probably aching after hours on marble floors. Yet there was still patience in her expression. Still warmth. I used to be fluent, Daniel admitted. When I was younger, my mother and I talked for hours without speaking out loud. He looked toward Evelyn with visible regret. Then somehow I became a man who communicates through assistants and emails instead. Evelyn touched his sleeve immediately and signed something gentle. Claire smiled faintly before translating. She says rich people are very talented at making simple things complicated. Daniel laughed quietly under his breath. A real laugh this time. Small, but genuine enough to surprise even him. The sound seemed to soften the entire room. Claire checked the old silver watch on her wrist before glancing toward the nearly empty dining room. I should finish closing duties. Daniel nodded immediately. Of course. But as Claire turned to leave, Evelyn suddenly signed one more sentence toward her. Something slower. Emotional enough that Claire's expression shifted instantly. What did she say? Daniel asked. Claire looked at Evelyn for a long moment before answering softly. She said Noah would have liked you. Daniel felt the words settle deeply into his chest. Because somehow, hearing that from Evelyn Mercer mattered more than any compliment he had received in years. Claire offered them both one final gentle smile before disappearing back into the quiet restaurant. And Daniel stood there watching her go with a strange feeling he could not fully explain yet. Not admiration. Not guilt anymore. Something quieter. The realization that one ordinary evening had just changed something inside him permanently. 1 week later, Manhattan woke beneath pale morning sunlight and streets still damp from overnight rain. People rushed past coffee shops carrying briefcases and paper cups while taxi horns echoed between tall buildings already glowing with early light. Inside Laurent restaurant, the breakfast crowd had not arrived yet. Chairs were still upside down on several tables, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted quietly through the nearly empty dining room. Claire Whitmore stood near the front windows arranging silverware with calm, practiced movements. The city outside looked awake and hurried. She looked tired, but peaceful. For the first time in years, she had stopped dreaming about hospital machines and silent hallways every night. Something about that evening with Evelyn and Daniel Mercer had stayed with her longer than she expected. Not because they were wealthy, not because Daniel was famous, but because she saw a son finally trying again before it was too late. The front door opened softly, bringing in cool spring air along with the distant sound of traffic. Claire looked up automatically and froze for half a second. Daniel Mercer stood there alone wearing a charcoal coat instead of a business suit. No assistants, no executives, no phone pressed against his ear. Just a slightly nervous expression that looked strange on someone usually so controlled. In his hand was a small paper bag from a bakery across the street. "Good morning," he said quietly. Claire blinked once before answering. "We are not officially open yet." Daniel nodded. "I know." Then after a small pause, he lifted the bakery bag slightly. "My mother said showing up empty-handed after an apology is lazy." Claire almost smiled despite herself. Almost. Daniel stepped closer beneath the soft morning light pouring through the windows. "She also told me I still sign like a stressed accountant." This time Claire laughed quietly before she could stop herself. The sound surprised both of them. Daniel noticed immediately how different she looked during daylight. Less guarded somehow. The dark circles beneath her eyes clearer now. The silver bracelet near her wrist catching sunlight as she folded a napkin carefully. "How is Evelyn?" Claire asked softly. Daniel's expression changed at once. "Warmer. Better." He nodded once. "We had breakfast together 3 times this week." Claire looked genuinely surprised. 3. Apparently, I owe her about 7 years of conversations. The honesty in his voice settled gently between them. Daniel hesitated briefly before reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. Not a business card. Not a contract. Just a handwritten note. "My mother asked me to give you this." Claire opened it slowly. Her eyes moved across the page while morning sunlight illuminated the careful, uneven handwriting. "Thank you for reminding my son that silence is not the absence of love, but the absence of listening." Claire swallowed quietly. For a moment, Noah's face crossed her memory again. 16 years old, laughing at the kitchen table with flashcards scattered everywhere. She closed her eyes briefly before folding the note against her chest. Daniel noticed the emotion immediately, but did not interrupt it. Some silences deserved respect. Outside, the city kept moving. Horns, footsteps, endless noise. But inside the little restaurant on the corner of Manhattan, peace lingered softly between 3 people whose lives had unexpectedly changed because one person finally chose to listen. And maybe that is the real lesson. Sometimes people are not asking to be rescued, only understood. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts below. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Or had someone change your life simply by truly listening to you?